So, I have read some pretty good books so far this year. And today we are going to talk about the best books I have read. There's going to be quite the variety because this is going to be like everything. It'll be horror, it'll be fantasy, nonfiction, historical fiction, whatever's in there. Let's get into it right now. And oh, also, I'm not going to do this in any kind of particular order until I get to the top three. Otherwise, it's in kind of a random order till we get to the top three because I thought all these books were great and just fantastic reads so far. The first one is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. Well, this book takes place in Jim Crow era Florida back in the day. There's this brother and sister. The brother, his name's Robbie, he's 12 years old. His sister, Gloria, she's a bit older. What happens one day as they're walking to school, and there's this white boy that comes up and he says some crap to Gloria that is super inappropriate. So, trying to defend her honor, Robbie kicks him. Everything's fine until the father of the kid who was kicked sees this happen. And so, Robbie gets sent to this Gracetown school for boys called the Reformatory. And the Reformatory is bad news bears. You go there and sometimes you don't ever leave. And the problem too is that Robbie's father was a figure who was trying to get, unions going and get more rights for people. The townsfolk or the white folk didn't like that so much. And so they think that possibly with Robbie going into this reformatory school, they might use him as bait to get the dad to come back, where they would probably, because these people are basically the clan, would kill the father. And it's such an intense and emotional and moving story. Like, such a great book. I cannot recommend it enough. And I will probably be saying that for like all the books I've in this list because they're all pretty dang fantastic. And this one is phenomenal. So, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The next one is This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. And this is a horror book. And this author also owns a horror-based bookstore called Butcher Cabin Books, which is in Louisville, Kentucky, which is somewhere I want to go and check out. But anyways, this book that she wrote, awesome. One of my favorite horror books so far this year. So there's this group of people and they all kind of know each other. Some of them went to school together. Some had did rock climbing together. And they're going to go out into this area in Kentucky. This guy, Clay, he had flown over this area where they were using LiDAR and they found this crazy cliff face that had never been mapped before. And so what he wants to do is to go around the country, find new spots for rock climbers and be like the first person to map them and whatnot. And he's doing this project too for like a final thing for his school as well. And he knows a climber who that he used to go rock climbing with. They just got sponsored. So he reaches out to her, reaches out to Dylan, which is her name. And she's like, heck yeah, I want to go do this with you. That would be awesome. Being able to like map out the climb and do this, like be the first person there is pretty sweet. There's another woman who comes along. Her name is Sylvia, and she is a plant or botanist expert. So she's able to identify different various plant life and whatnot, which is good. And then Dylan's boyfriend and their dog also goes. They go out to this area and they get there. At first, they're walking and it seems like they're just passing the same things over and over again. It's very mysterious. It takes them a long time to finally find this valley. And at first they're like, does this even exist? Is this even going to happen? I don't know. Are we lost? Because like all their, mechanical, electrical instruments aren't working correctly as happens in these weird, mysterious liminal places. And they finally find this valley. And this valley may just be the death of them. It is a land that seems to have been poisoned. It has a crazy history, and it was just such a great read. I have a standalone review for that, and I have a standalone review for most of the books I'm going to talk about today. They will all be linked down below if you want to get more information on the book and check them out. All right, so the next book is How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. And this is a mystery book, and I read this earlier this year, and honestly, this is one of the best mysteries I've read in a long time. So there's this woman. When she was a teenager, she went to the fair with two of her friends and went to a fortune teller. And the fortune teller told her oh yeah, hey, you're gonna be murdered. Didn't say when or why or who was gonna do it. And so for the rest of her life, this woman is trying to figure out who's gonna murder her, and it becomes an obsession. And she keeps files and like has like a crazy, a murder board of who could possibly kill her later in life. And so she has family. She ends up being close to 70, and she finally decides she wants to meet in person one of her nieces, who is her daughter's daughter. And so the niece is like, okay, so the niece is gonna go meet her, thinks maybe there's gonna be some changes to the will or something. And when she gets there, wow, the fortune finally comes true, and it turns out her great aunt is found murdered. And so that sets off a sequence of events that get all crazy, and the town is so like incestuous, and everyone's like kind of like hooked up with everyone, and it could be anyone. There's so many different people who are suspicious in this, and it's so good. Like, I don't know who it was right up until the end. The writing was addictive. It was such a fun mystery, and I would definitely read more books by this author. Also, there might be more with this main character that may be a protagonist in the future, possibly, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see. But yeah, awesome book. Great mystery. If you haven't read a good mystery in a while, seriously, How to Solve Your Own Murder is awesome. Okay, and an indie horror that I absolutely loved was In the Valley of the Headless Men by L.P. Hernandez. And this is a story of two brothers. They have two different dads. One of the dads was like just not in the life of the son. He was always making excuses for why he didn't show up and all that stuff. And the other brother, his dad was just a POS, violent a-hole. Now, the brother's mom passes away, and they're at the house, and they're going through her stuff, and the one brother finds all these letters that are to the other brother that were from his dad, the dad who never showed up. And he's like, hey, there's a bunch of these letters that are from your dad. And he's like, what the F? Why would my mom keep these from me? That's not cool. And so he's thinking, you know what? I don't even want to read these. I don't want to think bad of my mom. I may just throw these away. But curiosity gets the better of him, and he reads these letters, and he goes through them, and most of it is just like selfish BS excuses. But then he gets to this one letter, and his dad is like, there's this park that's up in northern Canada. I'm going there to find myself. And if you ever feel like you need to find yourself, maybe you should go there too. And so this gets the wheels turning. And the brothers start talking, and they decide they're going to go there. And before this happens, the one brother was kind of digging into it and researching it, and there's all this weird stuff about it, like rumors of giants and woolly mammoths that are not extinct, and like just tropical kind of conditions that shouldn't exist there, and just real weird stuff. And it's a heartbreaking and beautiful and emotional story. It's horror, but it's also like a life story, and it's just so freaking good. I would highly recommend it. Oh, and I should also say, not all these books came out this year. A good chunk of them did, but not all of them. Because this next book, it's not new. These are just the best books I've read this year. Doesn't mean they necessarily came out this year. So this next book, Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, the sequel to The Shining, which I don't know why it took me so long to finally get to it and read it, is awesome. I loved Dr. Sleep so much. The ending is fantastic. I know, like, King's not always known for, his endings, but this one and this book was so good. So, it continues on, and it follows the story of Danny Torrance, his struggle with alcoholism and trying to overcome that. And he has, The Shining. And so he starts communicating with this other child who seems to have this ability. Like this kid reaches out to him, and they start communicating from this like chalkboard that's in his room. Like there'll be messages on there from the kid, and eventually they meet, and it turns out there's this like group of people. Right now I can't think of what they're called. They're basically like energy vampires for the most part, and they find people with the Shining, and they inhale their steam, or basically their life force. And so they find out about this kid, and they're gonna come for the kid, and Danny has to like save the kid. And it's just such a good freaking book. And they call Danny Dr. Sleep because he works for this hospice. And so when people are going to die, they're getting to that point. Him and this cat, I forget the cat's name, they come in and they, help them on their way out of this world into the beyond. And there's so many different elements to the story. Just, it's such a good King book. I loved it so much. Would highly recommend. If you haven't read Doctor Sleep yet, it's freaking good. Also, read The Shining first, or, Okay, so a nonfiction book I love this year was If You Can't Take the Heat by Geraldine DeRuyter. Geraldine DeRuyter is a food blogger, a writer. She's been published all over the place in different publications, and she's just really freaking funny. And her book covers a wide variety of topics. A lot of it is all centered around food, like her first food memory, and calling out BS on all these chefs with their fancy first food memories. She's like, yeah, right. Her first food memory was grabbing a tube of toothpaste and squeezing it into her mouth. It wasn't like fancy magical foods from the land of beyond, as some chefs will say. Anyway, so when Mario Batali had a bunch of sexual harassment allegations against him, he sent out a letter of apology, and attached to it was this cinnamon bun recipe. So she wrote an essay on this that was rather scathing, and it went viral and got a lot of attention, whether she wanted it or not. And that kind of exploded her onto the scene. And just, she's funny and witty, and it's so well written. I absolutely love it. And it's geared towards taking down the patriarchy one page at a time. And it's freaking awesome. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. Best nonfiction book I've read so far this year. All right, next up we have an anthology of dark indigenous fiction called Never Whistle at Night. This was put together by Shane Hawk. It is one of the best short story books I have read this year, hands down. I loved almost every single story, and the ones I didn't love, I think there was like one or two, thought they were great. And a lot of times, you read a short story book, a couple are good, some are really good, some are just okay, and then sometimes some fall flat. But this one, I loved them. Almost all of them. And maybe the ones that I didn't love completely was because I was like, oh no, why? I mean, I don't know, sometimes stuff just like creeps you out a little bit. Maybe you don't love it that much because it's super gross or creepy. If you're looking for a compilation of short stories that is creepy and dark and horror, Never Whistle at Night is absolutely awesome. Okay, so now we're getting into my top 3, and these are the ones I was like, these are like my top 3 so far. So these ones actually are in an order that I thought were like the best 3 that I've read so far. So number 3 is In Ascension by Martin McInnes, and this book took me by surprise. It was a random book I picked up at the library, longlisted for the Booker Prize. It is about science, space, and it's written in a way that it's fiction, but it feels like non-fiction. So it follows this character, Lee. They grew up in Rotterdam. They are drawn to the waterfront as an escape from her unhappy life at home. Her father's pretty violent, used to beat her and her sister. She was always kind of drawn to the water and to science and to marine biology. And so once she gets out of her house and she's able to go to college, she starts studying like algae and doing microbiology, and she goes and starts traveling the globe to study ancient organisms. So she goes out with this one team, and a trench is discovered in the Atlantic Ocean, which may just be like 3 times the depth of the Mariana Trench, which is crazy and historic and whatnot. And so her and this dive team end up diving down there. And it's like a weird experience where they don't even almost remember what happened to them when they get back. They all become like delirious and ill. But the biggest thing on their mind is like they want to go back down there and get more samples and see what's up. They send down also like a submersible as well to gather stuff, but it gets to a certain depth where I think it just breaks or malfunctions and it doesn't work. And that's why I think they sent the people down there. So this time when they go back in, that doesn't happen. what they find there is this like archaea, which they think is like the building blocks of life when life first formed and all of that stuff. Lee, she starts out her career in this microbiology. Well, later in life, she makes a connection on that trip with this other lady who ends up working for a space technology kind of firm. And so she gets her a job at this other place. And what she's going to do, this is many years later, is she is going to form a way to grow crops on the spaceship when these people travel into space, and that'll be a big source of their nutrients, being able to like have a little farm on the spaceship that they can eat this stuff and survive and have like all the nutrients that they need and whatnot. So she starts working on that. And at some point, there's 3 different teams, like one team that is going to be going on this trip to space, another backup, and then a third backup. Well, the scientist, Lee, ends up being put on the third backup team. Like, no chance she's going to have to go to space or anything like that, because there's these 2 other teams. But they need a third backup trained, so her and these other 2 guys, they train for it. What are the chances that the other 2 teams might be compromised and that they might have to go? Well, if you want this book to be good, it has to happen. And so she ends up going to space. Do these crops actually work out? Because did all the testing they needed to do actually happen? And what's also interesting is they take some of the archaea that they had found at that spot where that new trench was that they found, and they use it in the crops she's growing. So there's this like weird connection between the 2 jobs she had. It's such a crazy book, and it's such a beautiful story. It's emotional, it's captivating. Like I said, it's fiction that reads like nonfiction with almost a sci-fi edge to it. It's a beautiful book. Absolutely loved it. All right, and so number 2 on my list, and this is not just one book, but couldn't we say that a series is just one long story, is it not, broken up into books? So I started reading the Dark Tower series this year, and honestly, the number 2 spot is going to the Dark Tower series. Like, I've read the first 4 books, and I have loved them all. Even the Gunslinger, that some people think is boring. I thought it just kind of laid out the map for what the whole story was going to be and where it was going to go and all that good stuff. Out of those 4 that I've read so far, I think maybe The Wastelands is my favorite, but I can't say an absolute favorite until I've read them all. But I have absolutely loved this series so far. Follows Roland, the gunslinger, and his journey to find the Dark Tower. What is the Dark Tower? Why is Roland obsessed with it? Why are the worlds falling apart? And can the Dark Tower be saved? Is it salvation? Is it damnation? Like, what is it? That is the question. Why did the seekers seek it? That's what we want to find out. And I am so enthralled with this journey and this freaking series. It's so good. I love it so much. All right. Now, the number 1 book that I have read so far this year. And this was a complete surprise because randomly picked it up. Didn't really have any expectations for it. Just thought the synopsis sounded cool. And that is The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. And like I said, I have standalone reviews for almost all of these. I believe I might have them for every single one of these. I actually do have them for every single one of these. So there will be individual videos for all these down below. The Book of Doors. Imagine if you had a book that would open up a door to anywhere. And not just anywhere, anytime. Anytime, any place. So this girl comes upon this book and she starts, bouncing around, going to different places. And then her friend is like, hey, what if this fell into like a bad person's hand? Like, they could just go rob banks or kill people or do whatever they wanted. And the one girl who finds the book, that she doesn't really want to think about that and all that good stuff. So she kind of ignores it. But then some bad people find out that she has it, and that starts bringing all these terrible people out of the woodworks that will stop at nothing to get this book, whether it be murder or whatever. And there's a really horrible evil lady in it who is after all of these different books, because that's not just the only book. There's a bunch of different ones. There's like the Book of Pain and the Book of Health and just a bunch of different ones. Invisibility, the Book of Shadows. It's a crazy, beautiful, emotional story. Like, I cried in the beginning, in the middle, at the end. It's just freaking emotional. Like, the main character at one point, she goes back and she sees like one of her relatives that had passed away. So you have like a lot of emotional things going on, and just, I guess it's fantasy, right? There's some elements of horror to it too. I loved everything about it, and I cannot recommend this book enough. It's so freaking good. What have been the best books that you guys have read this year? Read some really great ones, and I feel like I had a really great variety, right? There was like mystery, fantasy, nonfiction, short stories, a whole effing series. I just love Stephen King, so every time I read one of his books, I'm always like, I don't know, I'm not surprised, but he's such a master storyteller. Yeah, let me know down in the comments what have been some of the best books you've read so far this year. And if you are a fan of top 10 videos about books, the next video coming up will be the top 10 horror that I read from last year. If you're looking for some good horror recommendations, definitely check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button. Come back, see me again. Talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.